overview of participatory societal participation. Introduction. Dear learner, welcome to the unit entitled as an overview of participatory societal participation. I hope that you remember what you discussed in Unit 2 regarding the diverse nature of school and society. In this unit, you will discuss the essence of participatory approach and regarding the concepts of decentralization, accountability and empowerment. At the same time, this unit focuses on the major goals of school-society relations and major partners in school-society relations. Well, stay. Unit learning outcomes. Upon completion of this unit, you should be able to discuss participatory approaches to societal participation on education. Differentiate the different forms and levels of participation. Explain the differences between decentralization, accountability and empowerment. Discuss the main goals of school-society relations. Identify obstacles to school-society relations. Identify major partners to school-society relations. Lesson 1, The Essence of Participatory Approach, Society's Participation on Development Issues including Education. Activity. Dear learner, what are the key principles of facilitating participation for empowerment? How is it described? What are the outcomes of participation? What characteristics define meaningful participation? How is participation measured? Good job. Nice attempt. Now compare what you have reflected with what follows. Let us look in detail what participation, ownership, collaboration and teamwork and an approach based on democratic decisions provided by different scholars. In the 1970s and early 1980s, a desire by decision-makers to more effectively incorporate the perspectives and priorities of the local people in decision-making, policy development and project implementation led to the emergence of a number of participatory approaches to development. This reorientation towards greater participation in development by individuals was motivated by the development community's desire to move from an emphasis on top-down, technocratic and economic interventions towards greater attention to bottom-up, community-level interventions. Then, what is all about participation? To start with, it is useful to consider the origins, or etymology, of the word participation. Participation originates from Latin, derived from particeps meaning partaking, and pars plus capere, meaning to take or to share in. Common English definitions include taking part in or becoming involved in an activity, the state of sharing in common with others, and the act or state of receiving or having part of something. Thus, the central concept in participation is involvement or sharing, particularly in an activity. What is important to note about these definitions is the focus on both the nature and the extent of involvement, with qualitative and quantitative implications. Hence, a higher level of involvement, of participation, defined as having a share in, having a part in, being part of is achieved farther along the range, where parents take a more active part in the activities of associations, perhaps help in the classroom, and assist in other work. In this way, the focus of their relationship with the school widens from that of the parent concerned with his/her child's education per se, to a more global concern with the school as a whole. People from differing professional backgrounds may have different values and attach a range of meanings to terms. Schaefer, 1994. This shows us, participation means many things to many people. open to varied interpretations, and the level or intensity of involvement by various groups of actors may also greatly vary. At the same time, often the term participation is modified with adjectives, resulting in terms such as community participation, citizen participation, people's participation, public participation, and popular participation. The definitions given to terms associated with participation have often remained vague, confusing, and even contradictory. Especially when we see the distinction between participation and involvement is a case in point. Regarding the relationship between parents and school, two aspects are being discerned in the literature, namely parental involvement and parental participation, Deconcentration, 2009. On the one hand, you can find that the term community involvement has been given preference over community participation because it is not sufficient merely to participate, which may be simply a passive response. There should be mechanisms and processes to enable people to become actively involved and to take responsibility for some decisions and activities jointly with professionals. On the other hand, according to Deconcentration, 2009, unfortunately, these notions are often not operational, done ambiguously, and moreover it is not made clear what the exact differences are between them. The description of parental involvement has been expanded from participation of parents at school to include involvement of parents in the education of their children at home. Disforges in Deconcentration, 2009, distinguishes two forms of parental involvement participation, namely spontaneous versus planned. Whereas the first is bottom-up, the second is more top-down and typically concerns interventions or programs aimed to solve the problem of insufficient or no parental involvement. Further differentiation of parental involvement participation takes the following form. 1. Home involvement, A. Home discussion of school activities. B. Home supervision or monitoring of the child. 2. School involvement, A. School communication or parent-school contact. B. Participation of parents in school activities or organizational matters. Then, we can ask ourselves questions like, what is the effects of involvement and participation? Well, despite the fact that the relevant research results were found to strongly diverge as a consequence of conceptual differences, many of the results point to a positive relation between the involvement of parents and the school development of their child. According to Disforges in Deconcentration, 2009, the most important factor is good parenting at home with the following characteristics. The provision of a safe and stable environment, intellectual stimulation, the conduct of parent-child discussions, the functioning of parents as constructive role models who propagate the value of education and provide signs of high expectations for their children. The following elements are also of importance: the maintenance of contact with the school for the exchange of information, participation in school activities and the conduct of activities at the school and within the school administration. As a result, several different degrees of participation in development can be described. A useful modification of this ladder would describe degrees of participation as follows. 1. The mere use of a service, such as a primary healthcare facility. 2. Involvement through the contribution, or extraction, of resources, materials, and labor. 3. Involvement through attendance and the receipt of information, for example, at parents' meetings at school, implying passive acceptance of decisions made by others. 4. Involvement through consultation, or feedback, on a particular issue. 5. Participation in the delivery of a service, often as a partner with other actors. 6. Participation as implementers of delegated powers. And 7. Most completely, participation in real decision-making at every stage, identification of problems, the study of feasibility, planning, implementation, and evaluation. Schaeffer, 1994. Therefore, for purposes of the present discussion in this course, the concept of parental involvement was defined as the role of the parents in the support of their own child, both at home, for example, reading out loud, and at school, for example, discussion of marks with teacher. The concept of parental participation was defined as active participation of parents in school activities. With respect to the latter, a further distinction is made between non-institutionalized forms of parental participation, for example, lending a helping hand, and formal, institutionalized forms of parental participation, for example, parents' council, advisory board or school administration membership. Then, when we are looking at the issues associated with participatory approaches to development are not neutral and value-free. Rather, they are based on a number of assumptions which need to be taken into account while reading this lesson. Namely that 1. Participation has become a necessary aspect of development. Programs of development are likely to be more relevant, more supported, more successful, and more sustainable to the extent that they involve their targets in their planning, implementation, and evaluation. 2. Participation and collaboration are not panaceas for educational underdevelopment. They cannot solve all problems, and they should not be used as a substitute for serious, systematic public attempts to plan, manage, and finance basic education more efficiently and with greater imagination. Above all, they should not be used as an excuse by government to get out of the business of basic education. 3. Participatory and collaborative approaches are dependent on, and affected by, social, cultural, and political contexts. What works in one country may not work in another. These approaches therefore cannot be treated as recipes able to be implemented in the same way in all regions of the world. Rather, they should be seen as items on a menu of mechanisms, procedures, and administrative actions which can lead to a higher degree of participation in education, at both local and national levels depending on the context. 4. Such approaches have disadvantages as well as benefits, costs as well as savings. They are often difficult to implement, can be risky as well as beneficial, and are not free. 5. Based on considerable evidence of case studies, under the right conditions, and given the right precautions, the greater participation of more actors can help improve the quality of, and the demand for, particularly basic education. Schaeffer, 1994. This lesson is therefore not meant to propose universal, standardized methods to promote collaboration and strengthen partnerships. Rather, it will suggest steps that need to be taken by central government officials and local authorities in order to facilitate the implementation of such approaches both at their own level and at the local level. This recognition is quite explicit in the Declaration of the Right to Development adopted by the United Nations in 1986, which says, "The right to development is an inalienable human right by virtue of which every human person and all peoples are entitled to participate in, contribute to and enjoy economic, social, cultural and political development, in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized." UN 1986, Paragraph 1 of Article 1. It is evident from this statement that the right to development is to be seen not simply as a right to enjoy the fruits of development, but also as a right to participate in the process of realizing them. Schaeffer, 1994. UN, 2008. Hence, people's involvement could be realized in many ways and by different methods. This shows us that there are different ways to conceptualize family involvement in education. However, only some underscore active, ongoing engagement of parents and educators in ways that connect directly with children's learning. Consider three variations. First, do we view our goal as enhancing parent involvement in education? If so, Christensen, 2004, suggested parent involvement is the dedication of resources by the parent to the child in terms of a. Behavior, activities at home and school. B. Cognitive intellectually stimulating, enriching home environment. And C. Personal, knowledge of child's progress and learning content. Or, second, do we view our goal as enhancing the interface of home and school to promote students' learning competence? If so, school-family partnerships are the mutual collaboration, support, and participation of parents and school staff at home or at the school site in activities and efforts that directly and positively affect the educational progress of children. Or, third, do we add the essential nature of the partnership with parents to ensure optimal conditions for students' learning? If so, home, school and community are three major spheres of influence on children. Their interactions may be either positive or negative, close or distant, growth-promoting or growth-discouraging. They range from one-on-one interactions with the child to events occurring in the society itself. All three major spheres of influence should be considered in efforts to promote family involvement in education. Then when we are looking at types and levels of parental involvement, Epstein's, 1995, in Davis, 2000, identifying 6 types of parent involvement tends to be cited in the literature more often than any other. The 6 types of involvement identified by Epstein are: parenting, helping families with parenting skills to establish home environments to support children as learners; communicating, assuring effective communication about school programs and students' progress, school-to-home and home-to-school communications; volunteering, the recruitment and organization of the school's volunteer program; learning at home, involving families and working with their children at home, with homework and recognizing other learning at home opportunities; decision-making, including parents, students, and community members in the school decision-making process; and collaborating with the community, the identification and integration of resources and services from the community, coordinating resources and services. The above framework is based on 3 key principles. 1. Different stakeholders are involved, each with different aims and capabilities. 2. Stakeholders participate at different levels, from passive involvement to active empowerment. 3. The level of participation of each stakeholder may change at different phases of a development process: analysis, planning, doing and reviewing. However, development tends to work best when all stakeholders can participate to their desired level throughout the development process. The most important and complicated issue bearing on local-level planning and development is community participation. Effective community participation may lead to social and personal empowerment, economic development, and socio-political transformation. Yet there are obstacles: the power of central bureaucracies, the lack of local skills and organizational experience, social divisions, and the impact of national and transnational structures. We can cite also some barriers to participation, such as lack of time and knowledge about how to become involved, cut across all cultures and peoples. Others barriers, such as language differences and distrust of schools, may be particular to specific cultural groups. Unfortunately, too often schools do not recognize and honor different ways families are involved in their children's learning. It is important for school leaders and staff to redefine their vision of family involvement, and to recognize other forms of family involvement that go beyond those commonly traditional way that one size does not fit all, when developing school-family partnerships. For these purpose, school leaders and staff need support training to encourage family involvement. And, eventually, we should have to consider as educational leader that change takes time, and building a successful partnership requires continued effort over time. For that reason, as educational leader at any echelon, we should have to have a vision. Based on this, we should have to be long-sighted. These entails also to us, to have a consolidated, shared, comprehensive school-community relations plan or goal, which will be dealt underneath. Lesson 2. Defining decentralization, accountability and empowerment. Dear learner, in the previous lesson, we have seen the essence of participatory approach in education. For successful community participation, however, collaborating structures and organization is essential. This lesson is therefore intended to serve as a basis for delivering sessions related to the major concepts entertained in participatory approaches, that is decentralization, accountability and empowerment. Activity. Dear learner, to what degree has each new decentralization fostered greater local autonomy? To what degree have these reforms represented the extension of the central state further into everyday life? A. Decentralization. Decentralization has quietly become a fashion of our time. One of the most critical prerequisites to translate decentralization from theory to practice is a clear understanding of the concept. To be able to better envision what decentralization means, how best it can be planned and implemented, what its intricacies are, and how its challenges can be overcome. Development practitioners should be equipped with appropriate tools which could provide an analytical knowledge of decentralization from a conceptual viewpoint, accompanied by real and field-tested examples of the concept in practice. UNDP, 1999. According to Schaefer, 1994, decentralization is a process often particularly crucial in any attempt to facilitate the participation of a broader range of actors in development. However, decentralization is not simply a unitary concept, but has different forms for different functions. It is another concept fraught with multiple and often contradictory variations. The term covers a wide range of policy measures which are undertaken by governments as part of a larger strategy to restructure the socio-economic sectors, in response to changing patterns in the international economic order and external pressures from global monetary institutions. Today, decentralization is a firm component of national policy debates, donor recommendations and public sector management reforms. In its literal sense, the term decentralization implies moving away from the center. But this does not necessarily imply less central government control. It may only mean spreading central control across subnational levels, thereby, in fact, strengthening the reach out, the power of the central authorities. Another view is that decentralization necessarily implies the weakening of central government and concomitant strengthening of local, subnational government levels. This links the term decentralization to the notion of participation and sharing of responsibility through active involvement of the civil society. For instance, citizen participation at community level, and decision autonomy in the framework of school-based management, for instance. So, let us look some of the definitions given for decentralization by different authors as follows. Based on the definition of United Nations, decentralization, or decentralizing governance, refers to the restructuring or reorganization of authorities so that there is a system of co-responsibility between institutions of governance at the central, regional and local levels. According to the principle of subsidiarity, thus increasing the overall quality and effectiveness of the system of governance, while increasing the authority and capacities of subnational levels. Decentralization could also be expected to contribute to key elements of good governance, such as increasing people's opportunities for participation in economic, social and political decisions, assisting in developing people's capacities, and enhancing government responsiveness, transparency and accountability. UNDP, 1999. While decentralization or decentralizing governance should not be seen as an end in itself, it can be a means for creating more open, responsive, and effective local government and for enhancing representational systems of community-level decision-making. By allowing local communities and regional entities to manage their own affairs, and through facilitating closer contact between central and local authorities, effective systems of local governance enable responses to people's needs and priorities to be heard, thereby ensuring that government interventions meet a variety of social needs. When we see other views and definitions of decentralization from the World Bank, decentralization entails the transfer of political, fiscal, and administrative powers to subnational units of government. Or it may consist of expanding the resources and responsibilities of existing subnational governments. UNDP, 1999. Hence, decentralization may be defined in terms of the form, functional activities, and level, national to subnational, as well as the nature or degree of power that is transferred. Administrative, fiscal, market and political dimensions capture the form, functional activities, and level, for example, national to subnational and local, of decentralization, while devolution, deconcentration, and delegation refer to the nature and degree of power being transferred. Dunn and others, 2002. In other words, it covers a range of concepts with different implementation implications, especially in the degree of responsibility intended to be transferred to local actors. But, decentralization does not mean a relinquishing of all forms of control from the central government or administration to the local level. De Gaulle al. 2005. As Kachorka, 2006, points out, even in contexts where devolution of roles and responsibilities are intended, central governments have continued to exercise some control or oversight of many responsibilities devolved to local government. The important questions in this regard are, 1. What central powers are being decentralized, for example, only data collection and not policy making? Only resource extraction and not allocation and expenditure? 2. Why such decentralization is occurring, for example, for the reasons listed above or because an impoverished state can no longer finance its needed social services. And 3. To whom various levels in more decentralized systems are ultimately accountable. Schaeffer, 1994. From the above clarifications, we can understand that there are different types of decentralization systems. Definitions of the different types of decentralization vary, and the same terms are sometimes used in inconsistent ways in the literature on this subject. So, let us look some of the types of decentralization as cited by Robot, 2001, and Giuliani, 2004, as follows. Political decentralization: groups at different levels of government, central, meso and local, are empowered to make decisions related to what affects them. Administrative decentralization: different levels of government administer resources and matters that have been delegated to them, generally through a constitution. In terms of decentralization as a process of change, and according to the level of transfer of responsibilities, it is useful to distinguish between deconcentration, delegation and devolution. Administrative decentralization, that is a transfer to lower-level central government authorities, or to other local authorities who are upwardly accountable to the central government. The transfer of administrative responsibility for specified functions to lower levels within the central government bureaucracy, generally on some spatial basis. One of administrative decentralization, which redistributes decision-making authority and financial and management responsibility among levels of the central government. There is no real transfer of authority between levels of government. It may involve only a shift of responsibilities from federal service officials of the capital city to those stationed in provinces, districts, etc. One form of administrative decentralization which transfers specific decision-making powers from one level of government to another, which could be from lower level to higher level of government, in the case of federations, or government transfers decision-making powers to entities of the civil society. Regional or provincial governments, for example, become semi-autonomous and administer resources according to their own priorities and within clear geographical boundaries under their control. Most political decentralization is associated with devolution. Fiscal decentralization. In this case, previously concentrated powers to tax and generate revenues are dispersed to other levels of government. For example, local governments are given the power to raise and retain financial resources to fulfill their responsibilities. Fiscal decentralization, the decentralization of fiscal resources and revenue-generating powers, is also often identified by many analysts as a separate form of decentralization. But while fiscal transfers are important, they constitute a cross-cutting element of both deconcentration and political decentralization, rather than being separate category. Market decentralization: government privatizes or deregulates private functions. As mentioned above, there are also other types of decentralization such as deconcentration, devolution and delegation, presented here below as cited by Dunn and others, 2002, Ribot, 2002, and Giuliani, 2004. Deconcentration, sometimes called administrative decentralization, involves handing over more routine authority and decision-making powers from a higher level of the central government to lower levels, regional, district, cluster, still accountable to, and staffed by, the central ministry. As deconcentration, it aims to redistribute administrative responsibilities within the central government, whereas in what some describe as its purest form, As devolution, it seeks to create or strengthen autonomous action of local actors and institutions outside central government control. Deconcentration is the term referring to the process by which the agents of central government control are relocated and geographically dispersed. Deconcentration or administrative decentralization involves the transfer of power to local branches of the central state, such as prefects, leaders, or local technical line ministry agents. These upwardly accountable bodies are local administrative extensions of the central state. They may have some downward accountability built into their functions, but their primary responsibility is to central government. Deconcentration is a weak form of decentralization because the downward accountability from which many benefits are expected are not as well established as in democratic or political forms of decentralization. Delegation transfers, or lends, certain specific management responsibilities for some activities to other units, governmental or non-governmental, implying somewhat stronger, but easily cancelable, local autonomy. Delegation refers to the transfer of managerial responsibility for specified functions to other public organizations outside normal central government control, whether provincial or local government or parastatal agencies. It is one form of administrative decentralization which transfers responsibilities and authority to semi-autonomous entities that respond to the central government but are not totally controlled by it. Delegation is when public functions are transferred to lower levels of government, public corporations or any other authorities outside of the regular political administrative structure to implement programs on behalf of a government agency. Privatization is the divesting of functions to the private sector, to either voluntary or for-profit organizations. Ferguson and Chandrasekaran include privatization as a particular form of devolution to private ownership that has become prominent in recent times. Privatization is the transfer of powers to any non-state entity, including individuals, corporations, NGOs, etc. Although often carried out in the name of decentralization, privatization is not a form of decentralization. It operates on an exclusive logic, rather than on the inclusive public logic of decentralization. Devolution, sometimes called political decentralization, strengthens sub-national units of government and actually transfers considerable decision-making powers to local political bodies relatively independent of the central government. Devolution could also refer to the transfer of competencies from the central state to the distinct legal entities, which could include non-governmental and private organizations, Jutting al. 2004. Another way of viewing devolution is as a process of devolving administrative and fiscal responsibility to lower levels of government. It is in the actual devolution of power to local lower-level bodies of government, and even to community associations and NGOs, that the greatest scope for participatory development can be found. This strategy is meant to achieve various results. 1. To generate more resources and assure their more equitable allocation and effective use within the decentralized administrative units. 2. To improve the quality of decision-making and planning by making these processes more responsive to indigenous cultures and to local conditions, needs, and practices. 3. To speed up the decision-making process and free the center to focus on its legitimate strategic concerns. 4. To encourage initiative, innovation, and participation. 5. To increase local responsibility and accountability over issues more readily understood by local management and 6. To stimulate communication down and especially, up the system of control, Schaefer, 1994. On the other hand, decentralization is a large area covering a wide range of aspects, conceptual, institutional, organizational, and methodological. When we are looking decentralization in our context, education, what the literature also indicates is that in many contexts decentralization of critical decision-making on school development has produced desirable outcomes, especially in terms of local government and communities taking up responsibility for building classrooms, hiring community or contract teachers, or raising funds for school infrastructure development. What appear to have received scant attention are initiatives where local authorities, schools and local communities have galvanized their efforts to address software issues such as improving access to schooling, Dunn and others, 2002. Within the local community context, shared educational concerns, such as persistent dropout, high student absenteeism, and utilization of school fees are expected to galvanize community and local government action. Decentralization of education service delivery, it is also argued, can produce greater community pressure for transparency and accountability in school management, Chapman, 2000. One of the purposes of decentralizing education services is to widen the participation of non-education professionals at local community level in the running and management of schools. Over the past 2 decades, many countries have been engaged in a shift of decision-making authority to lower administrative levels, either to local or regional governments, or to schools. This move towards decentralization is a global phenomenon, affecting developing as well as industrialized countries, although the motives and incentives are diverse. The increased attention for decentralization in education is perhaps best reflected by the numerous initiatives to stimulate decision-making by schools, such as site or school-based management, SBM, the local management of schools and the establishment of relatively autonomous schools like. However, greater community participation in school governance serves no purpose in the absence of quality teaching and learning. Therefore, the importance of quality education has placed a heightened focus on accountability for teaching-learning performance. In other words, greater involvement of the community in school governance is purely to support the delivery of quality teaching-learning. It is for this reason that teaching and learning-based accountability is emphasized as one of the pillars of today's school governance. In short, establishing reconciliation and peace through the school governance mechanisms, practicing teaching and learning performance-based accountability policies and the engagement of broader and inclusive participatory school governance are the pillars to empowering the community and all the stakeholders. B. Accountability. The second issue arising from more participatory development is accountability, another word that continues to span a very wide variety of concepts and policies, making it an elusive concept to grasp. Governments claim to be responsible to their people. People try to hold them to account. Accountability is thus the measure of responsibility. The essence of accountability is answerability. Being accountable means having the obligation to answer questions regarding decisions and/or actions. Derek Brinkerhoff in Rebut, 2001, insists that citizens can only legitimately authorize representatives and hold them accountable if there are many avenues and institutions through which they engage with both each other and their representatives. There is another very important consideration about the relation between accountability and representation. Society is highly differentiated. More marginal groups within society will be less able to take advantage of certain accountability mechanisms, thus skewing the accountability toward more privileged groups. Because of this, there is always a need for multiple mechanisms that privilege marginalized or disadvantaged groups if they are to be included in the political process. Young, 2000 in Rebut, 2001. Accountability can also be enabled by legal instruments. Judicial, criminal, civil, penal and police codes uphold the above laws determining who has official jurisdiction over the management and disposition of resources. They also clearly set the framework for channels of recourse and the ability of citizens or local authorities to defend rights in general. Laws governing associations, cooperatives, economic interest groups, and lobbying are critical for providing protections to individuals and groups within society wishing to organize and act for social, cultural, economic or political purposes. Therefore, accountability relates to who is required to report to whom about, and therefore can ultimately be held responsible for, the determination and implementation of policies and procedures, the achievement of goals, the performance of institutions, and compliance with standards and regulations. At the most general and ideal level, this relates to the accountability of the state and its agencies, institutions, and structures to civil society. More specifically and realistically, in regard to participation and decentralization, it relates to the extent to which various levels of the administrative hierarchy are responsible to other levels both above and below it and to other partners. In systems both decentralized and participatory, higher levels of the bureaucracy are to some extent accountable to lower levels, rather than only the other way around, and local government agents, for example, the school and its staff, are to some extent accountable to their clients, for example, children, parents, the community, as well as to the local government office and the bureaucratic levels above. The question, answered differently according to the context, is how such accountability is put in place. Schaefer, 1994. Hence, accountability, defined as counterpower, that is, any power that balances or puts a check on the power of other power holders. Accountability is constituted by the set of mechanisms and sanctions that can be used to assure policy outcomes that is consistent with local needs, aspirations and the best public interest as policymakers can make them. Accountability then is about power, authority, and ownership, and defines the relationship between actors through identifying who can call whom to account, and who owes a duty of explanation and rectification by defining the lines and directions of accountability. The distribution of power is also defined. Rebut, 2002. Based on the above clarification, there are three main types of accountability mechanisms: political, administrative and public. Political accountability of political parties and representatives is increasingly through elections. Administrative accountability of government agencies is through internal accountability mechanisms, both horizontal and vertical within and between agencies. Public or social accountability mechanisms hold government agencies accountable to citizens. Citizen action or social accountability can reinforce political and administrative accountability mechanisms. Similarly, societies where multi-directional accountability occurs guarantee some degree of autonomy or self-government to lower levels of the system. This includes both autonomy for organizations to make and implement decisions regarding their own operations, and for individuals, to make decisions regarding matters pertaining to their own concerns. Such autonomy, within a context of accountability to other actors above and to clients below, can help to encourage better management, higher professional competence, and more effective services. One important premise of such a process of providing greater autonomy is that the various actors in the autonomous institutions, for example, a school, are professionals and able to make informed decision and conscious of self-responsibility for consequences arising from the decisions, a premise which may need to be realized by better training of these actors. Schaefer, 1994. C. Empowerment. One important outcome of more participatory processes will be empowerment. Greater participation in a decentralized system, with multiple and more democratic processes of accountability of more autonomous institutions, implies that people gain knowledge and awareness of their own social, economic, and political conditions, take action, to make and act on choices and to construct their own futures through a process of analysis and action, and, above all, gain control over the goals and processes of development, and over regulatory institutions. If it is accepted that participation should start at the stage of conception and still be in evidence at the stage of supervision, then it is necessary to agree to share certain elements of power. Schaefer, 1994. The concept of empowerment has become especially important in attempts to move the concept of participatory development from rhetoric to concrete practice. This concept is perhaps best defined as a group process where people who lack an equal share of valued resources gain greater access to, and control over, those resources. As a result, poor communities come more explicitly to assert rights and responsibilities in determining the direction of their own development. This power must be real, formal, and legitimate, including both the ability to make use of formal structures and regulations and control over decision-making processes, knowledge, and techniques. People who are empowered have the power to find direct solutions to their problems. They propose solutions, they do not beg for them. Schaefer, 1994. Therefore, the term empowerment has different meanings in different socio-cultural and political contexts, and does not translate easily into all languages. An exploration of local terms associated with empowerment around the world always leads to lively discussion. These terms include self-strength, control, self-power, self-reliance, own choice, life of dignity in accordance with one's values, capable of fighting for one's rights, independence, own decision-making, being free, awakening, and capability, to mention only a few. These definitions are embedded in local value and belief systems. Hence, empowerment is of intrinsic value. It also has instrumental value. Empowerment is relevant at the individual and collective level, and can be economic, social, or political. The term can be used to characterize relations within households or between poor people and other actors at the global level. There are thousands of examples of empowerment strategies that have been initiated by poor people themselves and by governments, civil society, and the private sector. Successful efforts to empower poor people, increasing their freedom of choice and action in different contexts, often share four elements: access to information, inclusion and participation, accountability, local organizational capacity. World Bank, 2001. Lesson 3, Major Goals of School-Society Relations. Dear learner, how do you proceed? Participation, ownership and an approach based on democratic decisions are key to the success of developing a health-promoting school. However, collaboration and bringing teams together is often not as easy as it sounds. because the extent or nature of participation by various actors may vary from place to place. Therefore, the level or scope of the activity must be taken into consideration when defining objectives of school-community relations. So, to make participatory approach meaningful for learners, it is significant to discuss some major goals considered for creating smooth school-community relations which are included in this lesson. Activity. Dear learner, why do we bother for close school-community relations? Is close school-community an end or a means to any other ends? Please mention few of the objectives of close school-community relations from your own experiences and discuss them with your peer. Dear learner, why do we have school in the first place? Why should we send our children to school? What is the purpose of schooling in general? Please try to reflect on this issue individually. Really excellent. Now let us examine different views of purpose of schooling provided by different scholars and compare your answer with that of the scholars. When we ask such questions, we are getting at the heart of the kind of community we want to live in and the kind of community we want our children to live in. First, when we look at the big picture, society, we see schooling not as a neutral island separate from, but as an integral part of, society. This implies to us to see school community context. School is conceptualized as a community of families and school personnel engaged in the educational process. The educational process is dynamic and wide-ranging and involves children, their families, and an institution called school. School is no longer viewed as a building or a collection of classrooms in which teachers and students work together. The school community, no longer simply bounded by geography, comprises all those who engage in the educational process. Rather, education systems are investing in schools as learning communities with strong partnerships between students, teachers, families and the wider community. Second, a society is a number of people held together because they are working along common lines, in a common spirit, and with reference to common aims. The common needs and aims demand a growing interchange of thought and growing unity of sympathetic feeling. Based on this, society places a heavy responsibility on schools and families. Schooling is not simply a process of teaching and learning, but of preparing children for the future. Schools are the vehicle for aspirations, not only for children who may conform easily to external expectations, but for every child. Therefore, responsibilities are placed on the school, on the parent, and on the child to make the educational process work so that each child who goes to school may fulfill his or her potential for growth. For that reason, many of today's leaders in education, business and community development are coming to realize schools alone cannot prepare our youth for productive adulthood. It is evident schools and communities should work closely with each other to meet their mutual goals. Schools can provide more support for students, families and staff when they are an integral part of the community. Appropriate and effective collaboration and teaming are seen as key factors to community development, learning and family self-sufficiency. Thus, school-community relations are essential to securing public input and public support for educational programs. Community awareness of public meetings of the PTA or school board and an opportunity to be heard at such meetings are necessary components of a positive school-community relations policy. At this instance, we can confront with question: what is and could be the goals for school-community relations? The school board may set goals and standards for school-community relations and may regularly evaluate its relationship with the public and its programs for maintaining open channels of communication and good relations with parents, community organizations, the business and industrial sector, and the community at large. Through its school community relations programs, the PTA or school board will encourage the community to take an active interest in the schools and participate in planning activities, to place a high priority on education and make funds available for an educational system that supports learning for all children, and to establish partnerships with the schools to enhance learning opportunities. Here, community participation is an important component of community development and reflects a grassroots or bottom-up approach to problem-solving. When we are looking from this perspective, one of the major aims of community development is to encourage participation of the community as a whole. Indeed, community development has been defined as a social process resulting from citizen participation. Through citizen participation, a broad cross-section of the community is encouraged to identify and articulate their own goals, design their own methods of change, and pool their resources in the problem-solving process. So, let's ask ourselves, what are major goals of school-community relations? First and foremost, the education of children and young people in schools is one of the most important tasks of any society, a task that is about much more than obtaining academic qualifications. In particular, schooling can help to counteract the negative views, hate, bigotry and prejudice that exist in our society, and promote the healing of community divisions. Not enough schools have addressed the difficult issues that confront our society. Something more must be done to encourage greater sharing and collaboration between communities and schools. If we are to help change our society from the path it has traveled on for too long, we need to empower not only our teachers but also our young people and our communities. We need to promote and encourage real, meaningful and sustained contact with children and young people from diverse backgrounds and cultures. Hence, the interest in greater participation in development derives from the belief that such participation can achieve several goals. These include 1. Ideological goals, to empower people in order to ensure their greater control over development and their greater influence over decisions that affect them. 2. Economic goals, both to seek more resources from a wider range of actors and to share the price of development by transferring some costs from the suppliers to the consumers. 3. Political goals, from the government side, to strengthen the legitimacy of the current government and make people co-responsible for social problems. From the popular side, to gain greater share of power in policy making and budget allocations. 4. Programmatic, to increase program or project demand, coverage, relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, success, and sustainability. And 5. Capacity building, to develop new knowledge, skills, and attitudes and provide beneficiaries a useful share in management tasks, monitoring, etc. Schaefer, 1994. Hence, a more participatory approach to development begins with the assumption that sustainable development ultimately depends on enhancing people's capacities as individuals and groups to improve their own lives and to take greater control over their own destinies. This assumption may seem self-evident, but, in fact, it is really quite radical in implication. A participatory approach to development represents a considerable change in the process of governance, in social and political relationships, and in who participates in, controls, and is empowered by the development process, Schaeffer, 1994. However, the challenge of achieving the education goals is both central to and strongly influenced by many factors such like the social, economic and other context, UNMP, 2005. And what is this integrity? Here we return to the question posed earlier about the reason for sending children to school. Ultimately, school serves not the business world nor any political agenda, but rather the child and young adult as he or she unfolds those capacities that make him or her uniquely human. And what makes the human being unique? At some level it is comforting to know that the current struggle to define a common purpose for schooling is not a new condition. Centuries ago, Aristotle noted there was no consensus regarding what should be learned by the young. He mentioned the possible purposes of study being usefulness in life, seeking goodness, or advancing the bounds of knowledge. Anyway, we can agree that educational organizations are social entities that have exceptional mission and orientation towards their goal fulfillment. To sum up this lesson, therefore, the emergence of the concept of participatory development, that is conceived not only as society-centered but also as democratic and people-centered, has also led to the redefinition of the role of the state, the local authorities, educational leaders and, above all, the community in addressing national development priorities. Especially, in developing a family involvement program, educators need to consider the cultural, social, and economic factors that are relevant to the unique needs of diverse children and families. Lesson 4, Obstacles to School-Society Relations. Dear learner, in the previous 3 lessons we have seen that the essence of participatory approach, the concepts regarding decentralization, accountability and empowerment as well as major goals of school-society relations. This is the 4th lesson of Unit 3. In this lesson, we are going to state the major obstacles for close school-community relations and discuss also the risks and uncertainties of participation in general. Activity. Dear learner, assume your school and surrounding areas. Mention some of the major factors hindering school-society participation. What do you think are the risks of participation in development? What do you think are the major challenges of community mobilization in your locality? First and foremost, it wouldn't be fair to pose a framework for building family and community involvement without acknowledging the difficulty and challenges of the work. Because the challenges come in many shapes and sizes, but perhaps can be illustrated in different ways, contexts and circumstances. Read the following case study. What do you learn or deduce from the statements given below? Give your reflection. Case study for observation in workplace. Almost any teacher could tell a discouraging tale of parents' nights with few in attendance, or of bruising conflicts with families over goals or decisions. Almost any parent or family member could tell a tale of an unproductive meeting, a poorly planned event, or a conversation with a teacher or principal that felt disrespectful or patronizing. It is difficult work to bridge the gap between our worlds, experiences, needs, even our schedules. Encouraging participatory approaches to development is difficult to do for several reasons. This is because there are often gaps in this relationship, within the school, within the family, and in their relationships to each other and to the needs of students. There are gaps between aspirations and realities, between manifest need and available programs. In the dynamic multicultural world of the child today, there are gaps between particular cultures and what education may offer. However, Everywhere it is a top public priority that children develop well and that schools support the development. According to Schaefer, 1994, when we are examining the gap, first, many communities, perhaps especially those most disadvantaged, are not at all homogeneous in nature. Social stratification, divisions along caste, religious, and ethnic lines, personal rivalries and social factionalism, and the incompatibility of interests are all factors which make it difficult to talk of community mobilization through participation. In such a context, participation may bring unresolved and unresolvable conflicts out into the open, exacerbating rivalries of class, caste, and ethnicity by making potential differences in goals and tactics explicit, rather than keeping them constrained and hidden through the operation of traditional roles and responsibilities. Second, even where community members may want to work together, a major obstacle may be the sheer lack of experience and skill in participatory and collaborative activities. Participation by the community in development and the collaboration of the community with other partners implies certain knowledge and skills, setting goals and priorities, running meetings, planning budgets, accounting for resources and so on. Third, potential participants, especially those economically and socially weakest, may lack a sense of self-confidence and political efficacy, the feeling that individual political action does have, and can have, an impact upon the policy process. They may also feel, or may have been encouraged to feel, that, given the overriding authority of the government, they have little political power, few obligations beyond receiving government services, and little ability to affect government policy. Fourth, marginal communities, and many governments, cannot bear the added expense of participatory processes, especially in terms of financial resources and of the time and energy required of participating community organizations, government agencies, and individuals. Fifth, participatory processes do not just happen by themselves or by fiat, but rather require new and complex managerial and supervisory skills, attitudes, and behaviors. Principals able to share authority within and across schools, teachers, especially those from another region, ethnic group, or language group, able to carry out surveys of community needs, WIRDA officers able to work with program staff of NOGs. Central planners willing to issue the regulations mandating community involvement in curriculum development. All of these are not easy to develop in traditional bureaucracies and, once developed, to sustain. Sixth, participation is often in conflict with a political culture where initiatives toward reform may require clear sanction from above and where, for example, both parental participation in designing, let alone questioning, school policies and flexible, non-standardized responses to a variety of development contexts are difficult to imagine. Seventh, many institutions and individuals have a profound inability or resistance to change. The inertia of inflexible systems, bureaucratic delays, the lack of teamwork and co-coordinating mechanisms, the absence of clear rules as to who should do what and when, poor technical support from those meant to provide it, and the fear of losing control to other agencies, to lower levels of the system, or to outsiders, all make it difficult, at least early in various reforms, to encourage new initiatives. Eighth, such problems are compounded by more concrete administrative obstacles. Logistical problems and staff turnover are notable in this regard. When staff trained in a more participatory approach and method are transferred or resign, much time and effort are wasted. Administrative procedures may also discourage collaboration. This can make any innovation, let alone that based on greater popular participation, difficult to implement. Although PTAs and SMCs are being set up in many education systems in developing countries, there are tensions and contradictions in their roles and responsibilities that undermine their effectiveness. Also, the composition of these bodies may not necessarily be representative of parents. Another problem, for many parents, their own personal school experiences create obstacles to involvement. Those who have dropped out of school do not feel confident in school settings. Explain how the diverse contexts of their lives create tensions that interfere with positive home-school relations. Even educators often don't take into account how a parent's own school experience may influence school relationships. Listen in as one father describes his son's school progress. Case study 5. Obscured father: they expect me to go to school so they can tell me my kid is stupid or crazy. They've been telling me that for 3 years, so why should I go and hear it again? They don't do anything. They just tell me my kid is bad. See, I've been there. I know. And it scares me. They called me a boy in trouble, but I was a troubled boy. Nobody helped me because they liked it when I didn't show up. If I was gone for the semester, fine with them. I dropped out 9 times. They wanted me gone. Reflection: this father's experiences created mistrust and prevented him from participating more fully in his son's education. Yet, we cannot say that he doesn't care about his son. On the contrary, his message is urgent. For many parents, their own personal school experiences create obstacles to involvement. On the other hand, school practitioners are less and less willing to give time to participation schemes they see as inauthentic. School personnel may subtly display patronizing or negative attitudes toward parents. Schools need to welcome parents whenever they visit the school by conveying a positive attitude toward the first language of the students and families. However, just as parents have challenges that impede their collaboration with schools, teachers have challenges that impede their work with parents. Most literature report that the following barriers that impede teachers when it comes to family and community involvement: negative attitudes toward parents, misconceptions and assumptions about parents, unfamiliar cultures, lack of understanding of the students' cultures, language barriers, inability to understand the parents' home languages, training, lack of training in working with parents, and increased responsibilities, lack of time to develop family involvement activities. Similarly, because of the variety of students' backgrounds, reaching out to families has become increasingly complex for schools. Educators who define families in more narrow terms may have assumptions that make it difficult for them to understand the families of many of their students. Carter, 2003, identified the following common assumptions held by educators that can either hinder homeschool collaboration. Parents who don't attend school events don't care about their children's success in school. Parents who are illiterate or unemployed can't help their children with school. Parents from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds don't understand how to help their children with school. It's up to parents to find out what is going on at school. And, parent involvement is not worth educators' effort. For many years, the prevailing view of many educators was that families had a very limited role to play at their children's schools. Parents should come to school only when invited. Stay-at-home mothers served as room mothers. Contrary to the assumption of many educators, research on family connections with schools has revealed that parents are interested in their children's academic success regardless of ethnicity, culture, or economic status, although they may not know how to help their children or may feel incapable of assisting them. Ferguson found that parent involvement encompasses a multitude of complex phenomena. Differences in the family structure, culture, ethnic background, social class, age and gender represent only a few of the factors affecting interpretations of or generalizations about the nature of parent involvement. Scribner and Ferguson, 2005. This statement reflects a few of the factors that complicate and sometimes inhibit family involvement with schools, particularly for those families representing diverse populations. In his reports, Ferguson, 2005, also says that the way a family defines support and interest is through their own perspective. Unfortunately, many times the school's perspective and definitions of the family involvement in school are not the same as those of the families. These differing viewpoints can create barriers to meaningful participation of families' participation in schools. Activity. Dear learner, assume your school and surrounding areas. What kinds of opportunities can the school principal explore to collaborate with families? How can family and parental involvement challenges be overcome? Parents need to know how the school system works and how they can have access to it for the betterment of their children. Conceptualizing barriers for each socializing system as well as the relationship may serve to promote perspective-taking and enhance the understanding of constraints involved for all individuals. Educators must be sensitive to the status-oriented family issues such as socio-economic status, parental education, and the like. The stimulus for engaging parents in education lies with educators. Therefore, addressing barriers for educators is necessary. At the school level, it appears that strong leadership and administrative support are essential to increasing meaningful family involvement. The good news is that barriers, if identified, understood, and thought of as opportunities, can lead to positive service delivery changes, such as school practices for outreach to families or new responsibilities for families. Therefore, identifying these assumptions is a first step toward changing them and determining ways for educators to encourage family involvement in school. If educators view children simply as students, they are likely to see the family as separate from the school. That is, the family is expected to do its job and leave the education of children to the schools. If educators view students as children, they are likely to see both the family and the community as partners with the school in children's education and development. Partners recognize their shared interests in and responsibilities for children, and they work together to create better programs and opportunities for students. Ferguson, 2005. Most of the time it is not lack of interest that prevents parents from becoming involved in their children's education but challenges such as poverty, single parenting, language literacy barriers, and cultural and socio-economic isolation that hinder involvement. A number of other barriers can prevent families from being involved in their children's education. These barriers may originate in the home environment or may be related to school policies and practices. Schools can address these challenges by creating an environment, and explicit structures, for sharing and learning about home cultures, values, talents, and experiences, as well as for identifying and dealing productively with conflict. In many ways, building such an environment is the crux of all family and community engagement. Families know their children the best and should be respected for that knowledge. Schools have a lot of knowledge about children, but they are not in the relationship for a lifetime. When schools understand and respect what families bring to the table, then partnerships can grow. Carter, 2003. To summarize this section, school-community partnership development also takes time. Partnerships are built one relationship at a time, and need continual nurturing. Collaboration also often requires changes in traditional roles, responsibilities, expectations, and schedules, which can prove difficult for partners. All of the subsequent structures and strategies can be viewed as contributing to creating a welcoming environment, valuing and learning about home and community, and negotiating differences and conflicts. Lesson 4, Major Partners in School-Society Relations. Dear learner, the major partners are the fifth one you are going to learn is a strategy of collaboration for two-way communication in school-community relations. Partnership is an important concept that implies sharing of power, responsibility and ownership, though with each party having different roles. This section provides an illustration on the concept of partnership, why partnership, identify potential partners, types or kinds of partnership, and finally we are going to see also the problems and solutions in partnership. You are advised to read each topic in detail and relate with the existing partnership that you working at your school. Well, stay. Activity. Dear learner, what is partnership? More specifically, what are family-school partnerships? What agencies and organizations within our community have a strong parent-provider partnership model and approach, including shared leadership? Do family, school and community connections make a difference? What can be the role of the community to strengthen school-community relationship? Well, I presume you have very well tried to scrutinize how and what type of partnership is effective for educational institutions from other social organizations. Now, check your reactions with what pursues. Education in the 21st century means much more than providing students with academic knowledge and skills. Educators alone cannot help children develop intellectually, personally, socially, and morally, develop all the knowledge, attitudes, and skills they need to be productive citizens and caring people as adults. Educating children to live in our rapidly changing and increasingly complex society requires contributions and commitments from everyone in the community. Carter, 2003. Here, the notion of partnership is an important point. Then, let us deal with such question: what is the essence of partnership? What are the major characteristics of effective partnership? Well, to partner implies a relationship, frequently between two people, in which each has equal status and certain independence but also implicit or formal obligations to the other or others. Partnerships are a collaborative relationship designed primarily to produce positive educational and social effects on the child while being mutually beneficial to all other parties involved. Hence, partnerships need to be underpinned by broad principles and strategies but remain specific to school context, including family-community characteristics, school size, levels of schooling and student needs. Thus, the central characteristics of effective family-school partnerships include sharing of power, responsibility and ownership, though with each party having different roles. A degree of mutuality, that begins with the process of listening to each other and that incorporates responsive dialogue and give and take on both sides. Shared aims and goals based on a common understanding of the educational needs of children. And Commitment to joint action, in which parents, students and teachers work together. Carter, 2003. Second question, why we concern partnership? What is the necessity behind the curtail? Nice. Case Study 6, the story, The Enormous Cassava. There was once a farmer who decided to plant a field of cassava. He noticed that one cassava grew bigger and faster than all the others, so he decided to leave it until the end of the harvesting season so that it could grow as much as possible. Later in the year, the farmer decided that it was time to harvest the enormous cassava. He went down to the field and pulled and heaved and shoved, but the cassava stayed firmly in the ground. Greatly frustrated by this turn of events, the farmer called his wife to pull on his belt while he pulled the cassava. Still the cassava would not move. So, the wife decided to call her dog and told it to pull her while she pulled her husband, and the farmer pulled the cassava. Still the cassava would not budge. A little while the dog thought about calling the cat to come and assist them. The cat pulled the dog, while the dog pulled the farmer's wife, and she pulled her husband, who pulled the giant cassava. Still the cassava would not come out of the ground, and soon they were all exhausted and angry with each other. Eventually, and by this time everybody was very tired and short-tempered, the cat thought about calling the mouse to help. The farmer, his wife and the dog all laughed at the cat and wondered how such a small creature as a mouse could possibly make a difference and result in the cassava being pulled from the ground. However, there seemed to be nothing else to do, so the cat went and called the mouse. The mouse pulled the cat pulled the dog pulled the farmer's wife pulled the farmer, and the farmer pulled the cassava. Suddenly, there was a very loud plop sound and the cassava was pulled clear of the ground. Everybody was delighted that the great task had been accomplished. Students' activity. Students pay attention to the story read by facilitators. In pairs, participants talk about what the story means to them. Still in pairs, participants now talk about what this story means to them in relation to development planning and partnership specifically. In plenary, one pair shares their thoughts. Another pair who thinks they have something new to say makes a contribution. This continues until 4 or 5 pairs have had a chance to speak and the story has been unpacked. Someone will hopefully make the point that the contribution and the opinion of even the smallest counts, and will make a big difference. This may be the child, a school cleaner, or even a new teacher. This is part of the rationale for the term whole school partnership planning. If this point does not come out, the facilitator can ask, who is the farmer in the school? Who is the wife? Etc. And finally, who is the mouse? Reflection. In today's complex and dynamic world, a single person or a couple of persons cannot manage everything. No leader, institution or nation can exist or lead without the support or involvement of others. The same applies to education as well. Management activities should not be placed in one individual's hands, but rather the contrary, they should be shared both by teams and employees. This means that any person in one way or other would act as a leader. School personnel involvement in the management of educational institutions requires a management approach based on trust, cooperation, communication and cultural development and improvement, which in turn implies changes in the school strategy, culture, tasks and work organization. The above-mentioned points show the need to build a school environment that focuses on constructive debates, differences of views, goal and task interactions. Already 2 or 3 decades, practitioners found that an educational institution will gain noticeable benefit only if it is supported by a structure model which encourages maximum participation along with the appropriate cultural context which promotes collaboration. Partnerships offer different, but mutual benefits to schools, including staff and students, and to everyone they work with. Effective partnerships can raise school morale by bringing staff together to work to shared goals, promoting collaboration in curriculum development and others. Promote and develop innovative working methods. Strengthen the school's relationship with its community through sharing skills, expertise and resources. There are benefits too, for the organizations and individuals who work with schools in these ways. These include sharing skills and expertise with young people and adults in a variety of new contexts. These and other studies share several findings. First, all of them indicate that recurrent costs, not capital investments, represent the bulk of required funds. Second, although the incremental costs needed to meet the goals are large, countries should be able to finance a significant share from domestic resources and other sources. Third, differences across countries and regions are extremely large in terms of the affordability of reaching particularly universal primary enrollment. Currently, in Ethiopia, Tanzania, and many other sub-Saharan African countries, even with a doubling or tripling of domestic primary spending, reaching the goals will require very large increases in local resources as well as external aid. Even with new resources, the education goals are not reachable without major changes in institutional arrangements and improvements in the efficiency of education spending in developing countries, particularly in Ethiopia. UNMP, 2005. From the above, we can understand that partnerships between schools and outside organizations and individuals are essential to the kinds of educational development we are advocating. They are not additional luxuries. Such partnerships enrich and extend the experiences of young people and support teaching and training. In both ways they can help directly to raise standards of achievement. In this lesson, we are going to identify potential partners in education in general and schools in particular for successful mutual development. Partnerships should be considered as connections between schools and community resources. The partnership may involve use of school or neighborhood facilities and equipment, sharing other resources, collaborative fundraising and grant applications, volunteer assistance, mentoring and training from professionals and others with special expertise, information sharing and dissemination, networking, recognition and public relations, shared responsibility for planning, implementation and evaluation of programs and services, expanding opportunities for internships, jobs, recreation and building a sense of community. School-community partnerships can interconnect together many resources and strategies to enhance communities that support all youth and their families. They could improve schools, strengthen neighborhoods and lead to a noticeable reduction in young people's problems. Building such partnerships requires visioning, strategic planning, creative leadership and new multifaceted roles for professionals who work in schools and communities. When we are talking about partnerships in education, there are two approaches appear to have dominated thinking about rural institutions, and both are unfortunately fallacious. These are paternalistic and populistic approaches to society participation in education. According to Schaefer, 1994, the paternalistic approach assumes that rural people are passive and fatalistic, uninterested in improving their lives, and incapable of initiative in making improvements. Consequently, everything must be done for them, or to them, in a top-down, bureaucratic manner. An opposing view is the populistic approach, which assumes that rural people are vitally interested in change and completely capable of transforming their communities if only the politicians and bureaucrats would leave them alone. Both approaches derive from unreal stereotypes of rural people, who are neither as inert and ignorant as the first assume, nor as virtuous and wise as assumed in the second. On the whole, rural people are more capable and responsive than the paternalistic model of social change suggests, but less able to change their lives autonomously than the populistic model presumes. The particular interest of this lesson is the development of more participatory approaches in education. This includes the broader and more active partnerships both inside the system at the central level and in the school, and the greater collaboration of educational personnel and the external community in planning, managing, and implementing educational programs. The potential partners are many: students, teachers, school principals, and local educational officials, parents and members and leaders of the local community, community associations and NGOs, private enterprises and universities, and so on. For the purposes of this analysis, we will focus on 5 major partners: 2 internal, the government and its officials, and the school, and 3 external, parents and the larger community surrounding the school, NGOs and other stakeholders. Schaefer, 1994. Carter, 2003. The government, bureaucracies and bureaucrats. What are the general characteristics of government and its officials which affect their usual reaction to more participatory approaches to development? To answer this question, we must first differentiate between the political and the administrative sides of government. The political side is critical for any discussion of participation. Depending on the government's philosophy, legitimacy, and strength, it may either ignore, resist, or actively prohibit greater participation in society, or permit, encourage, and actively facilitate it. Especially in large education systems, it may realize the utility of moving at least some of the responsibility for the implementation of policies and programs to lower levels of the bureaucracy. On the other hand, the administrative side of government may also have their own responsibilities. Commonly, the bureaucracies, in education ministries as well as in other sectors, may be effective managers of top-down development projects and programs and may have a range of human and material resources, an extensive infrastructure, and administrators and experts who bring to their work considerable knowledge, skills, and experience that help to participatory approaches. But even if the politics of a nation tend to encourage participation, they also may possess several characteristics which work against more participatory approaches to development. Some of the problems are limited knowledge of, or sensitivity to, community conditions and local experience, a top-down mentality, centralized, standardized, and routinized governmental structures and procedures, limited financial and human resources, inflexible procedures of planning, decision-making, implementation, evaluation, accountability, etc. However, as education policy drivers, there are a number of key government policies and strategies that facilitate the promotion of equal opportunity and good relations in education. Especially, the creative and cultural development of young people is of concern to several government departments. but local education authorities still have statutory duties to ensure that schools in their area meet the terms and requirements of the national curriculum and to improve standards and quality in education. This level is necessarily a crucial actor in any kind of educational change, especially given the variety of important roles it can play. These include providing professional assistance and technical support to schools and their personnel, promoting the exchange of information across schools, mediating and channeling communication between the top and the bottom and passing information both up and down the system, and participating in the selection, placement, and promotion of teachers and principals. The school, principal and teachers. The school, as the major actor in educational development, is composed of both teachers and managers. Both are included in this heading, though their roles in various contexts are often quite different. In some systems, school principals are seen as the lowest end of the government bureaucracy, trusted to carry out its administrative tasks and deliver its educational instructions to teachers. They therefore tend to share many of the characteristics of the government administrators. In other contexts, however, school principals are seen more as senior teachers, above all responsible for pedagogical issues, with administrative tasks added on, but generally treated in the same way as teachers by the bureaucracy. Some teachers have considerable knowledge of their students, of the local environment and of what is feasible and useful in the context of the local school. There are many so-called high-involvement teachers who equate professionalism with the ability to maintain a dialogue between the in- and out-of-school lives of both their students and themselves. Hence, teachers and schools are important, and they have also undergone significant changes. These changes are related in part to changes in sociological perceptions, certain factors, such as organizational and social composition factors or teachers' work patterns and conditions neglected before due to theoretical and methodological focus, have now come to the fore. This is because we should have to consider that schools as extended family. When children begin their educational careers, the school becomes an extension of the family. If learning is to occur, the trust relationship developed between a parent and child during the first years of life must be transferred to school staff. In order to build a trusting relationship, families need to convey to children that teachers play a special role in their lives similar to that of extended family members. In turn, teachers must earn this trust as extended family members in the relationships they build with children and their families. In addition to offering emotional support, teachers can also nurture resilience by helping students build networks of caring adults who will serve as a positive force in their lives, encouraging activities that will help students develop caring relationships with peers, and teaching students social skills. All stakeholders should have to recognize the crucial role that schools have in contributing to the reconciliation of our society. This is not a job solely for schools, but schools do play a critical role. The roles of schools in partnerships are twofold. First, the ethos of the school itself can be enormously enriched through the involvement of the wider community. Second, schools' own resources can be of tremendous benefit to the community at large. Schools have much to offer in terms of the experience and expertise of staff and their own specialist facilities and resources, including laboratories, sports halls and performing arts facilities. Creative schools can contribute significantly to the social and economic development of the whole community. Significant sums of public money are invested in schools. The return on this investment is less than it might be because many schools are closed more than they are open. Creative partnerships between school, business and the wider community are already taking place in many areas. We need to identify and build on existing good practice to develop a national strategy of creative partnerships. Reviews of research, Boethel, 2003. Henderson and Mapp, 2002, in Ferguson, 2005, on addressing the needs of the families of diverse populations suggests that if school leaders desire to increase family-school connections, school staff should take the following steps. Adopt formal school and district-level policies that address issues related to the involvement of families from diverse populations. Engage principals in active support of these programs. Help staff learn strategies for working with parents from all cultures. Help all families navigate the educational system. Practice outreach rather than traditional approaches to involvement. Practice trust and relationship building strategies and recognize that it takes time. Help families learn strategies to support students' academic needs. And encourage the development of the total child as this greatly impacts academics. To apply the above strategies in practice, principals and teachers are critical to successful family and community involvement efforts. Therefore, principals need professional development and adequate resources to implement and support these programs. The community, parents and local organizations. There exists an enormous gap between the power and authority of the educational administration at the national level and that of parents. The educational administration represents a wide and stable organization. Its personnel have extensive experience in mobilizing resources and public support for the execution of their decisions. Parents, in contrast, constitute an unorganized body which lacks a common ideological stand. The natures of the community and of the conditions which determine its fate are perhaps even more varied than those of the school. Communities can be defined by law and geography, culture and language, class and caste, interest and attachment. They can be heterogeneous or homogeneous, united or conflictive, poor or rich and so on. The involvement of parents and the community in school is largely extractive in nature. That is, community, especially parental, participation is limited to the provision of resources, money, materials, labor. Other, more substantial involvement in terms of consultation or management or control, in the diagnosis of needs, the development and implementation of school policies, the design of educational content, or the delivery or evaluation of such content, is usually seriously constrained. More involvement in education might therefore permit families and communities to accept that their accountability in the education of children extends beyond the provision of material requirements for schooling. That it includes the main responsibility of assisting, guiding, and extending whatever help their children need to harness their potential. And that they equally share the burden of education children with the teachers. What are family-school partnerships after all? Family-school partnerships are collaborative relationships and activities involving school staff, parents and other family members of students at a school. Effective partnerships are based on mutual trust and respect, and shared responsibility for the education of the children and young people at the school. Why are family-school partnerships important? Families are the first educators of their children and they continue to influence their children's learning and development during the school years and long afterwards. Schools have an important responsibility in helping to nurture and teach future generations, and families trust schools to provide educational foundations for their children's future. At the same time, schools need to recognize the primary role of the family in education. This is why it is important for families and schools to work together in partnership. Research demonstrates that effective schools have high levels of parental and community involvement. This involvement is strongly related to improved student learning, attendance and behavior. Family involvement can have a major impact on student learning, regardless of the social or cultural background of the family. Family involvement in schools is therefore central to high-quality education and is part of the core business of schools. The aim of the Family-School Partnerships framework is to encourage sustainable and effective partnerships between all members of the school community, including teachers, families, and students. These partnerships should view each partner as making equally valuable contributions, while respecting different contributions. Respect student needs and preferences. Address barriers to involvement in schools by families, in particular Indigenous families, and actively help previously uninvolved families to become involved. Create better programs, opportunities and learning for students. Give families appropriate opportunities to contribute to school decision-making and governance. And contribute to professional satisfaction for principals and teachers. Among the principles which underpin effective family-school partnerships, families are the first and continuing educators of their children. Therefore, in order to achieve effective school, family and community partnerships and successfully to improve student learning is to build effective relationships. A school will not achieve equity and excellence for all of the students in its care if it does not acknowledge, understand, and include the families and communities of all its students. Non-government organizations, NGOs, as a sector of society, are a diverse entity operating under different paradigms with a diverse range of interests, activities, and perspectives on development issues. At the same time, other types of umbrella organizations exist that represent groups of NGOs with common development, ideological, religious, or other affiliations. In most of the cases, NGOs see development not merely as an activity geared towards producing a certain output but as a process of developing community motivation and awareness, of promoting people's abilities so that they can help themselves and, in turn, create a self-reliant community and nation. As NGOs play an increasingly large role in the collection and distribution of development assistance, their involvement in the planning and delivery of development programs also mounts. In most of the cases, NGOs have developed from agencies primarily concerned with relief, welfare, and service delivery activities, to those encouraging small-scale, self-reliant local development projects and processes. To those more directly involved with community empowerment and social transformation. Another is the service provider organization, which sees its role more in terms of supporting, protecting, linking, and developing the capacity of a myriad of action-oriented. In ideal terms, NGOs are most often described as people-centered, flexible and responsive, creative, democratic and non-hierarchical, cost-effective and pragmatic, and often independent and non-aligned. From the above clarifications one can infer that NGOs encompass many things and all differ from each other and from their equivalents in different countries. Nevertheless, regardless of the difficulties, Hall, 1986, and Moser, 1993, List the following characteristics of NGOs. Flexible and adaptable to environmental conditions. Close to grassroots than governmental agencies. Stress the participation of beneficiaries in planning, implementation and evaluation of programs. Have simple administrative structures which require their personnel to be responsible for multiple tasks in the organizations. And, subject to fewer rules and regulations. Whatever their characteristics, NGOs generally seek to carry out several functions, providing development services in those fields, activities, or regions either underserved by government or parallel to those provided by the government, often with greater effectiveness and equity. More and more frequently, they also work directly with governments, and sometimes with donors, in the provision of services, often as an intermediary between government agencies and the poorest levels of society, especially in education. Other stakeholders. When we say school community, it is a group of people bound by a common interest in ensuring a high-quality education for all students in a school or district. School community members include, but are not limited to, students, teachers, school leaders, school counselors, school support personnel, families, community agencies, businesses, residents, and other partners in the educational process. Hence, there is a need for greater coordination between these departments in order to promote a more coherent pattern of provision, and a more strategic use of existing resources. NACCCE, 1999. This is because schools cannot achieve the required standards on their own, and need to work in partnership with a variety of agencies, organizations and individuals. They have a key role as catalysts in establishing partnerships and encouraging relationships between schools and outside organizations and individuals. Even though it is difficult to mention all important partners in education, it is worthwhile to mention some major stakeholders here under as stated in NACCCE, 1999. The Youth Service. In recent years, both the voluntary and statutory youth service sectors have become increasingly active in promoting and supporting creative and cultural programs for young people. These are important areas of development. The youth service reaches out to young people beyond the formal education sector in a wide range of different contexts, through youth clubs, community projects, festivals and visits. In many instances they do this in partnership with a variety of funding and organizational partners. Young people themselves are often closely involved in the planning and organization of events and initiatives. Cultural organizations. We noted earlier the extraordinary growth of interest in cultural organizations over the past 20 years or so in developing work with education. In recent years, national and regional funding policies in the arts have strongly encouraged this need. There is a wide variety of models of organization and of types of practice. Especially, the arts are important in education because they give young people access to the ideas, values and beliefs of others and contribute to all aspects of a child's development. They have been shown to feed the creative imagination and improve cognitive and academic skills. Sports clubs and organizations. Sports clubs and organizations too have important roles in the creative and cultural education of young people. The diversity and range of physical activity and sport provides students with many opportunities to develop a variety of skills. Sport also provides challenging opportunities for students to develop their problem-solving abilities, creative thinking, social skills, and physical competence as part of their continued development within society. Sport clubs and organizations can support schools in promoting these particular skills in children and should be regarded as important allies in promoting the creative and cultural development of all young people in schools. Business and industry. Business and industry are valuable resources to education in a variety of ways. There is a wealth of experience and expertise within business. Industry must be encouraged to share this through active engagement in education. This investment will be mutually beneficial. Ways of involving business in education include: experts from business and industry should be encouraged to visit schools and share their experience of the professional world with children and teachers. Work experience placements could be provided for students and teachers. Business could be encouraged to share equipment with schools or to donate old stock. Cash donations could be made to support specific creative projects of schools. The focus here is not only on big businesses, but on medium and small businesses that could donate an hour a week to link with schools. Successful partnerships exist between some schools and private ICT firms. The firms provide the schools with up-to-date ICT equipment and training for teachers in return for the use of the facilities out of school hours to provide adult courses. It is only through business partnerships that education can keep up with the development of new technologies. Visiting professionals. Visiting professionals in all subject areas should be encouraged to visit schools to share their experience of the world of work and about their chosen fields. There are many examples of professional artists visiting schools. These are important, but people from many other areas of work have much to offer too. Students should be offered the opportunity for work experience placements within the creative industries. It will be involved at least in 3 broad activities: a. Helping talented individuals in the fields of science, technology and the arts to achieve their full potential. b. Helping turn inventions and ideas into products and services which can be effectively exploited. c. Contributing to public knowledge and awareness of science, technology and the arts. This is particularly effective where students share the same first language. Further and higher education sector. There is a wealth of experience and expertise in further and higher education in all disciplines. Successful links can be forged between schools and further and higher education to support the work of the national curriculum, to provide teacher training and to enrich opportunities for creative and cultural education. Many good examples of such links already exist. Professional associations. Many professional teacher and subject associations also play key roles in supporting and enriching the school curriculum and teacher training across a range of subjects and disciplines. We can mention a lot of partners. However, we should have to take care from factors that affect the quality of partnerships. For instance, while families may be more diverse than ever before, they share the common trait that they are all busy. Similarly, teachers and school leaders are busy people with multiple responsibilities. Family involvement may not be a priority among the many issues that compete for their attention each day. Scarce school resources, in terms of time, personnel, and funds, may make the adoption of any new initiative seem unreasonable. Tight budgets, a reality in most schools, may not support additional activities to encourage more family involvement. Carter, 2003. However, for families as well as educators, family involvement need not be a supplemental activity, one more thing they have to do each day. Working together with strong administrative support, families, schools, and communities can find effective ways to integrate the most promising strategies into their daily routines so that they mesh with other school improvement initiatives. In this way, family involvement can be viewed by both parents and educators as a valuable and necessary part of what is done each day to help encourage all children to learn. To conclude this lesson, the interests of the various partners are mutual but not always identical. Each partner has different contributions to make, and each will gain differently in terms of skills, understanding and experience. The success of partnerships lies as much in the quality of preparation and follow-up work as in the event itself. Consequently, partnership projects must include enough time for research, planning, evaluation and dissemination. Success in improving education requires tremendous political leadership and commitment by citizens, civil society leaders, bureaucrats, politicians, parents, and many others outside the education system. UNMP, 2005. Finally, schools need no longer be sole traders in education. We all have an interest in the quality of education, and many people can contribute from different fields of expertise. We see these partnerships in education not as luxuries but as essential to the kind of education all young people now need. They do not happen without planning, and they often have implications for resources. Activity. Dear learner, to what extent is partnership occurring in your locality? Is there any evidence from your staff and parents on the performance of partnerships? Unit Summary. Dear learner, how do you get the content of Unit 3? Yes, I assume that you said we have got a lot of lessons. To recapitulate, we have seen that good schools alone will never be good enough. It can be seen that there are a multitude of levels and types of participation, and each has a necessary role, and it is also dependent on the context within which participation is practiced. Participation is the process through which stakeholders influence and share control over priority setting, policy making, resource allocations and access to public goods and services. We have seen also the term decentralization in the context of public sector management as a variety of meanings, making it broadly synonymous with socio-economic restructuring in general. In this case, decentralization refers to a range of reforms such as the devolution of decision-making powers to lower levels of government or to the private sector, or deconcentration of tasks from the center to lower levels without moving decision-making powers. Privatization is emphasizing on shifting responsibilities between the government and non-governmental actors. The term is employed to describe measures to transfer responsibilities to the private sector, reallocating responsibilities to the informal, commercial and not-for-profit, voluntary sector. We have seen also the barriers in the school-community relations come in many shapes and sizes, but perhaps can be summarized in the following points: diversity, imbalance of power between educators and families, negative experiences of parents with school, mistaken assumptions, time, resources, and logistics. Besides, the lesson also shows the more the relationship between families and the school is a real partnership, the more student achievement increases. From this unit we have got also that there are a variety of activities in which schools can become involved to build improved school-community partnerships. School communities are encouraged to review their current supporting structures, policies and procedures and develop new ones where necessary to accommodate all partners into goal fulfillment of schooling. Review questions. Part 1. Choose the correct answer and write the letter on the space provided. 1. the initial concept of participation defined as A. Having a share in, B. Being part of, C. Having a part in, D. All. 2. Among the following, which one is not considered as genuine participation process? A. The mere use of a service, B. Participation in real decision-making, C. Involvement through attendance, D. All. E. A and C. 3. Parent involvement is the dedication of resources by the parent to the child in terms of A. Cognitive intellectual, B. Behavior, activities at school, C. Personal, knowledge of learning content, D. All. 4. What kind of mechanism used for creating a family-friendly school environment strategy? A. Create an open-door policy, B. Father-friendly practices, C. Maintain a welcoming bulletin board, D. All except B. 5. Which one of the following are considered as major partners in education? A. Voluntary and statutory youth service, B. Sports clubs, C. Cultural organizations, D. All except A. E. All. 6. Students' achievement in school is the extent to which that student's family is able to A. Become involved in their children's education in the community, B. Create a home environment that encourages learning, C. Express high expectations for their children's future careers, D. All e none. 7. All parents have the capacity to support their children's learning means A. All parents can contribute to their children's learning, B. All parents have funds of knowledge about their children, C. Parents' capacity should be respected and tapped by school staff, D. All. E. A and B. Part 2. Write true if the statement is correct and false if the statement is incorrect on the space provided. 1. Participation has become a necessary, if not sufficient, aspect of development. 2. Good schools alone will never be good enough. 3. Families are the first educators of their children. 4. Strong structures at the top level guaranteed collaborative approaches to education. 5. The challenge of achieving the education goals is strongly influenced by many factors. Part 3. Write short answers for the following questions on the space provided. 1. Write down 3 major goals of school-community relations. 2. Explain the rationale for creating partnership in education. 3. List down 3 obstacles to effective school-society relations.